Okay, so I am sharing my screen, and I wanted to start by showing you what a Pressbooks book would look like kind of towards the end of the process. So we'll start by imagining what's possible. So every time you build a new book with Pressbooks, it will have its own URL or its own address on the web. In your case, all of your books will live at this openbooks.lib.msu.edu address, but they'll all have their own unique address there. So a Pressbooks book, a landing page for a book would look like this. You'll have a title, you'll have main contributors or the authors. You can have a brief description that you can customize and say whatever you like. It could include an image or an award if it won an award. You also will then indicate what kind of license your book has been published under. It could be all rights reserved, or probably most likely it will be some version of a Creative Commons license that you select and choose for yourself. Regina's probably talked to you about that, and will encourage you to pick a permissive license so that others can benefit. You'll also see a cover image, and if you choose, you can make the book available for download in lots of different file formats. So Pressbooks makes it really easy to export your book in offline formats. So for example, this book is available in lots of different flavors. So if I wanted the EPUB, I could download the EPUB and read it offline. If I wanted a digital PDF, I could get that. If I wanted a PDF that was formatted for printing, I could get that file, as well as some more exotic flavors of XML or XHTML or open document formats. So that's kind of like the top above the fold. Once you start scrolling down, you'll then see a table of contents, and this will show you all of the stuff that's in the book. So there are sections, or what we call parts, that can be expanded and collapsed. And then there are chapters within those sections or parts. There is a further subunit. If you want, you can display the top level heading in chapters, but that's not being used in this particular book. Down below, you'll see some book information. So they've provided a pretty detailed description of what this book is. You see more credit information for the authors, more detailed information about the license and a subject. And then at the bottom, the librarians will love this, probably only the librarians, but there's metadata about the book. So you'll see title, authors, editor, contributor, license, the subject information, the publisher, publication date, and if you use ISBNs or DOIs, those would be displayed and associated with the book here. So that's kind of an example of like a landing page for a book. And then let's go inside and look inside of a book. So I could pick a random chapter here. Let's look at the product scoping overview. Here is an example of a chapter. So this book is using a particular theme, and in that theme, the title is blue and italic in that typeface. And then the text comes and you start to see headings, bold text, links, more bold text, a new section, a new section, a new section, a new section, and so on. And at the bottom, you'll see again a license statement. If the chapter's license is different from the book, it would display here, and there'd be more information about the book. If I came back to the top, you can also see the table of contents is available anywhere you go in the book. So I could jump to a different part of the book here, and you can see there's been a video embedded in this particular chapter. So that's a little bit of an example of what's possible with Pressbooks. I'll give you another flavor. This is a book that an example from a course that I used to teach. So one of my favorite poets is the Wisconsin poet Lorraine Niedecker. And so here's a short poem by Lorraine Niedecker that I used to teach. So at the beginning, you'll see there's a bit of a context. We have a footnote, and if you hover over the footnote, there's a tooltip. Or if I click on the footnote, it takes me down to the footnote, and then I can jump back to the part of the book. So footnotes function kind of like you'd imagine. You'll also see there's a kind of dashed line. This would be a glossary term. And if I click on the glossary term, you'll see a definition would pop up and help me understand more about the jargon society in this case. Here's the poem itself. And then following the poem, I chose to make a multi-part formative assessment, a quiz about this poem. So the question is, who was Lincoln's general? And I might say, oh, it's Samuel Whiteside. The next question is, I need to fill in this question about this Native American leader. He was the leader of the Sauk people. Abraham Lincoln was involved, and Black Hawk was 65 years old. So I'm working through this activity. I'm going to select the rhyme words here. So this is like a click on the word, match the thing. I'm going to get this one wrong, and we'll see, oh, I actually got that wrong. And so if I wanted to, I could see the solution. Oh, it was bloom, and I could retry this. So it's formative practice to help the learner keep doing this and get feedback until they feel like, okay, I'm ready to move on. And then it'd be a true false question here. Okay, let's retry that one. And then I come in at the end and I would say this. So I've done this full activity here. We could have many of these activities or just one. I did pretty well. I could show the solution or retry this as many times as I want. The other thing that I'm doing in this book is, if you notice, there's this little highlight here. So if I click on this highlight, you'll notice this is the annotation layer. Right now I'm in the private layer, and I could switch to the public annotation layer and you'd see, wow, actually there's a lot of different annotations. So this is using the hypothesis annotation tool. You can see lots of different annotations have been made. Some have images, some have a discussion, some have responses, some have audio elements.
Foreclosure. Tell him to take my bare walls down.
And then if you scroll down a bit further, you'd see lots of annotation here. Here's one, there's a conversation thread where the original post had an image and a question. The reply had a YouTube video embedded, and the reply to that had a link with recipes. So you can do a lot of different things with the annotation tool. I'll focus a bit more on the H5P and annotation next time, but I just wanted you to get a sense before we started on some of the things that are possible that you can begin to imagine doing for your learners or as you're building interactive learning material. I want to pause right there and say, just from the opening demo of examples of things, were there any questions or things that you wanted me to slow down on or that make a bit more clear?
Maybe it's an advanced question, but for those quizzes in the book, is there a way to collect responses?
So kind of yes and no. So we right now, the basic frame is to do this for learners first and for learners only. We're building, we have an LTI provider plugin that allows you to connect this book to the learning management system and will allow people to exchange grade information and show the instructor how they're doing. That's an optional add-on for institutions, and right now Michigan State isn't using it, but they may want to in the future. So.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so what I want to do is, if you'd like to follow along, I think you're welcome to. What we'll do is we would come to the open books lib.msu. This is your Pressbooks network, so that anybody at Michigan State, I understand, can have an account and can begin creating and publishing content. If you come to this site, you'll notice in the top right, there's a sign-in link. I think many of you have already been issued Pressbooks accounts. If you have, you could go ahead and log in with your credentials here. If you haven't, probably talk to Regina and she'll get you set up. But this would be the first step. If you've forgotten your password or you don't remember what it was, you can always click the lost your password link here and enter your email address, and it will send you a new password or help you reset a password if you've forgotten it. In my case, I remember my password because my computer remembers it for me. And so I log in. Anybody following along, or if you get stuck here, we can slow down. But at this point, what I would then do, okay, the people that have Pressbooks accounts are the faculty that are working on OER projects. If you were to click the admin link, it'll take you to a menu that looks a bit like this, and you'll see a My Books link at the top. If you are a faculty member that has a Pressbooks account, you will see, hopefully, your book or your empty bookshell here that Regina has already made for you. Let's pretend, though, that you don't already have a book, and you've logged in and you want to start using a book. It's pretty simple to make a new book in Pressbooks. You just click this Create a New Book link. And it will bring you to a form that you fill out, and it warns you, okay, your web address has to be 4 characters, letters and numbers only, and it tells you it cannot be changed, so choose this carefully. So I'm going to say webinar demo is the name of this book, or the URL, and we'll call this webinar demo book, sure. And it'll ask you whether you want the book to be visible to the public. Usually when you're starting to create it, you'd say no, and then you change the setting later, but it's up to you. So this is how you'd create a new book if you need to create a new book. It'll take a few seconds here, but then I will have a new webinar demo book that I can use. All right, so it's made a new book, and you'll now notice I'm in the dashboard of my new book that I've created, and we'll see a bunch of different options along the side. Other people may decide, hey, and rather than making a new book, I'd like to start by cloning an existing book. If I'm working in open content or your librarian or someone else may help you find a really great open textbook that you want to adapt or adopt rather than create from scratch. So to do that, that's a fairly simple process, but what we'll do is I will say, let's go to the Open Textbook Network and start there. the Open Textbook Library. So here you can see you can browse different subjects and find open textbooks on the topic you're interested in. Let's go to student success. As I'm scrolling through student success, I look at this and I happen to know this book was published with Pressbooks. So was this. This one I'm not sure about, but this one was, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and that one, and that one. I don't know about this one. I think so. That one, yes. So again, like 80% of these books were already published in Pressbooks, which bodes well for me. But let's say, let's pick, I like this Blueprint for Success in College and Career. Regina's nodding. Okay, this is a great book. This won a big textbook award, a textbook excellence award recently. So I like this book. It's published in Pressbooks, I can see, and it already has a Creative Commons license. All of that means that good sign for me to clone. To clone a book, I simply copy the URL. I come back to Pressbooks, and instead of creating a new book, I'm going to click Clone a Book. I paste in the URL, and I say, what's the URL I want it to be? Let's say Blueprint for Success. And I'm going to click Clone It. So at Pressbooks, we've built an API for books. And so what's happening is this network at Michigan State is talking to the other network, the Rebus network, where that book lives, and says, do you have a book at this URL? Is it public? Yes. Does it have a Creative Commons license that would let me clone it? And we say yes. And then it says, okay, give me the book. And so now Michigan State's Pressbooks network is receiving a perfect copy of the original book, including the metadata, including the images, including the media, including the existing H5P quiz activities or glossary terms if there are any. And now in just under a minute or so, we've made a clone of that book. So you now have a Michigan State local version of Blueprint for Success in College and Career. To look at that book, I could then click on this thing and it will show up now because I cloned it. It will show up in my catalog. And if I visit the homepage for this book, you'll say, oh, wow, I'm on the Michigan State Library. Here's my local copy. And we'll notice if I scroll down a bit further, underneath the book description, there's a source attribution statement that tells us this book is a clone version. It may differ from the original. And so it will give attribution and a link back to the original. So that's a little bit about how you might want to get started with cloning an existing book. The next thing I would show you is how you might bring content in. So let's go back to my webinar demo book.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I was following that, and I got one of the OpenStax books that I would be interested in getting also some materials from. And when I went to clone, it says that that book URL already exists in MSU. So how could I import it if it's already cloned, but it's not in my library?
Saul, I have already cloned that for you, and you are an administrator for that book. So the type,
right, but I see that one, but if I want to copy a different one, that's already in, because I want to merge books, imagine, right?
I think it sounds to me, Saul, what's happening was that the URL that you were trying to use was already taken. So you would just need to change the URL in the cloning. So you would need to put a number behind it, or it would, because it can't clone to a URL that's already taken. So you would just have to probably provide a different, that's my suspicion based on what you just said.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. What I want to show you here then is, or sorry, let's pause. Any other questions about cloning? Okay, so then next we'll say, we say we have this newly created book. It's an empty book, and I want to bring content in from elsewhere. So I've already written something, or I have materials or document that isn't in Pressbooks, but that is open and licensed, or that I've already written. So the thing that we would do to start with here is we'd come down to Tools and we'd click Import. So Pressbooks allows you to import from lots of different file formats. We try to avoid, vendor lock-in wherever possible. So we'd say, what file format is your content in? So earlier I went to Project Gutenberg and I grabbed an EPUB. I think it was John Muir. It was a book that's in the public domain. So let's start with the EPUB. So I'm going to choose this file. I'll come on my desktop. I put them in demo files. And I'll say, okay, here's my EPUB right here. So I've got an EPUB file that I want to upload. I'm going to say Pressbooks import this EPUB. Oh no, this one's Aluda Equiano, which is a great book as well. So I'd say, which of these pieces of the book do I want to bring in? Let's bring it all in. So I've just imported in a few seconds the whole ebook of The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Aluda Equiano. It will probably need a little bit of cleanup, but it's here in Pressbooks and it's ready for me to start editing and revising in the import. The next thing I might want to do is say, let's import from a different source. Let's say I've got a Microsoft Word document. You might have written something in Word, or someone has written something in Word. So we'll say, let's go in here, and I've got a chapter that's already ready for import. So I pick a Word document to import, and I'll say import here. And Pressbooks will also try to parse that Word document and look and say, oh, I think we recognize what we would call chapters. So if you use the heading 1 style in Word, Pressbooks will think of that as a new chapter. And so we say, okay, there's these 6 existing chapters. Let's import those. So in just a few seconds, I've taken Word and I brought those in as a series of chapters. And if I were to view that, you'd see this came in from Word. Here's a heading that was automatically created. Here's a footnote that was automatically created, a block quote, a text box, my other footnote here. I can also do things like use columns or bold, italics, bulleted lists, those kinds of things. So the kind of things that you'd normally expect to come in will come in, provided that you've formatted your Word document correctly. We describe a bunch of different kinds of things that you can do using short codes, and each of these are supported in Word. So if you use these short codes in Word and then import them into Pressbooks, they will be preserved, and we describe it in this guide chapter here. So let me share with you this link to the guide in the chat. So that's 2 different kinds of importing, one from EPUB and one from Word. Another kind of common way to import content would be to do it from a web page. So you can do this from an existing Pressbooks book, which will look really interesting. Let's say you found a Pressbooks book, but you didn't want the whole book. So let's say even my guide. We'll just pick this guide. I'm going to bring in 1 or 2 guide chapters. So here, rather than doing a file, I'm going to say upload, import from a URL, and I'll enter a Pressbooks book chapter. And instead of cloning the whole book, Pressbooks will say, okay, we found a Pressbooks book, and we see that it has all of these parts and chapters. Which ones do you want to include in your book? So you'd see, okay, here's the book that we found. Let's just bring in the search and or the, I don't know, the parts and chapters chapter. So from that book, I only want 2 pieces. Let's bring in these things. So this would be kind of how you might do a remix if you want to bring in material from lots of different sources. And now we're going through a similar cloning routine where we're looking at the original book. We're only grabbing the 2 pieces that we asked for. And that part should have just been cloned for me. And you'll see, all right, these 2 chapters came in along with their attribution. You can also clone from other openly licensed sources, if I found something, let's say at LibreTexts, it's a very big library of open content. Let's go in biology. It always takes me a while to navigate through. Okay, great. I don't want to go there. All right. Here's a book. Here's a chapter. Okay, so let's say this is the chapter I want, this Gerald Bergstrom chapter. So I can take that URL. I can come in to Tools and Import. And then I can come to Web Page URL, Import from URL. I'll paste this link and I'll import it. And Pressbooks will bring in that chapter from LibreText. It says, okay, we think we found this chapter. We'll bring it into Pressbooks, and then you can edit it and work with it there. So if I come down here, here's the chapter. You'll notice usually there'll be a little bit of extra stuff at the top, you know, like that came from LibreText that we'll clean up. But down below, here's all my content. Here's my image. Here's the other kinds of things that I was expecting. So hopefully you'll find that that's a pretty nice tool to help you bring content into Pressbooks to get started. I'll pause there and ask for any questions about importing content that wasn't cloned directly from Pressbooks, or anything you might want to know about that. Most likely, as you do this, you'll start to have questions, or you'll have people that you want to ask questions to. I think Regina and her colleagues at the libraries will be great places to go initially. If they get stuck, they can always come to us at Pressbooks, and we'll help provide the support they need to get you started.
When you mentioned the short codes when you're importing from a Word document.
That's correct, yeah.
Does it also, if you use the styles that are in Word, do those import over as well, or do you have to use the short codes?
Yeah, generally no. So what happens when you're using pre-formatted styles in Word, Sometimes that will come into Pressbooks, but usually it comes in with a lot of extra cruft that you'll end up needing to strip out. So we try to sanitize those. So I would recommend not using the built-in word styles if you want your book to be styled in a certain way, but to do it in the Pressbooks book. The one exception is the heading 1 style. We recognize that as a new chapter break. So if you want to just build one big document, but you want it to split into chapters when it comes to Pressbooks, using that predefined heading 1 style in Word is the one exception.
Thanks.
That's a great question. Yeah. Other questions about importing content? Okay, so the next thing I want to show you then is, if we look at Ariba's, the guide to making open textbooks so far. Okay, so I showed you earlier a complete landing page where you had all of this information on your page. But if you look at the page for my demo book, you're going to notice it's way sadder. You're like, oh, it looks so naked, right? There's like nothing here. There's no metadata. There's no book info. Even the cover looks like a sad typewriter. I mean, it's not sad, but it's incomplete, right? So what I want to show next is how you can make your book landing page look the way that you want it to. Like this, for example. So the secret here is you click on admin for your book, and in your dashboard for your book, you'll see a page that says book info. And basically, book info is all of the metadata you could ever hope to enter for your book. If you enter information here, it will appear on your book homepage. You can even see more of it if you want, so there's lots of metadata, but we'll start with a title. We could add a subtitle, which is a fake book for testing. You can see people that we're giving credit for. I'll show that in a moment. I can add a publisher. So True Steel Press, I like that one. I'm in Madison. It remembers everything for me, so I don't have to think anymore. And then I could pick a publication date. This was published on April Fool's Day. That's a nice one, right? If I have an ISBN or an ISBN for ebook or print, you can enter them. Or if you're using DOIs and you've issued a DOI for this book, you can enter it here. You can also set the language that your book is written in. I know that some faculty are working on language texts, so you'd be able to declare the language that the book is in, or the target language for the book. And we support a lot of different languages there. It will change the metadata for your book as well, which makes it easier to find for people in that language. If you have a cover image that's different from the sad typewriter, you can upload it here. We give you some instructions or directions, but you can disobey them if you'd like, to some extent. You can also select a subject heading. We're using a taxonomy provided by a group called Thema. And so this is a kind of common taxonomy for books. If you want, you can see some more instructions here. It will take you to the Thema taxonomy to understand it a bit more and how it's being used. I probably lost all my changes there because I didn't save them. Good job, Steele. Okay. We'll go back and come in. And then you'll notice down below, you can enter copyright information. This is a pretty important stage right here. The copyright holder is me. The copyright license. I'm going to choose from the available set of choices. You can see it's all rights reserved or any of the Creative Commons licenses, Creative Commons 0 or public domain. I'm going to choose CC BY, which is my preferred license. And then you could add a text copyright notice if you wanted to add additional instructions or information about the copyright license you've chosen or how you want people to give attribution. You can enter a tagline. Here's a tagline, a short description. I'm a short description. And then I'm a longer description. This is a second sentence. Okay. And that might be the metadata that I'm entering for the book for now. So I'm going to save that book information. And now when I go to the landing page of the book, you'll see all the information I entered earlier is now visible. So here's my subtitle. Here's my short description. Here's the person who's the author. Here's the new Creative Commons license I've applied. And now if I go to metadata, you'll see here's my longer description. And here's the author, the publisher, the publication date. Some more information I entered. A really common task would be, though, giving credit to other people who worked on this book, even if they don't have a Pressbooks account. So the way that we would do that is we'd come into book info and we'd start creating contributors. And these are people that I want to give credit for. So I'm going to start, of course, with Regina. I always want to give her credit. And I'll also add Leah because I see you on the screen. And I'll add my sister because I like her. Okay, so we'll come into book info now. I've made 3 new contributors. Now when I come back to book info, I could say actually the editor of this book was Regina. And the reviewer was Leah. And Bonnie Hill was a contributor. So you can select people from your contributor list and give them credit for doing various things in the book. And I'll say, you know what, actually Regina was a co-author. She did a lot of work on this, as well as the editor. So now when I visit my homepage, you'll see Regina and I are listed as co-authors. And in the metadata, Regina is listed as the editor, Leah as a reviewer, and Bonnie as a contributor. So that's the way that you can give credit for people. Now, none of those people have an account in my book, and none of those people have editing access in my book right now, but they all have received proper attribution and credit. So that's how you do that with the metadata. I'll pause there and say any questions. Okay, Andrea, great question. What do we do if someone's a co-author of just one chapter? That's great. Let's say the bug. I come to read the bug and I'm looking in my chapter. You'll also notice that you have the ability to enter chapter metadata, which may be different. So for example, let's say here the author was Leah. Leah wrote the bug. And Leah said, instead of using CC BY, I actually prefer CC BY SA for my work. So I'll say, great. I'm giving you you can set your own license. And the chapter, if it has a different DOI, could be entered here. But let's do that. So what I've just done is I've said now, if you look at this chapter, you'll notice Leah is being given credit as the author of that chapter. And at the bottom, you'll see the license for this chapter says the bug by Leah is licensed under, and it gives the license attribution for that particular chapter. So there you go. Other questions about metadata for the book and the book info / homepage? Okay, the next thing I want to show you is the editing interface. So most of you will probably spend most of your time here in this organize menu. The organize menu is a visual table of contents for your book. What you'll see for every book is that they all have front matter and back matter sections, which can include normal front and back matter stuff for your book. And then you can have as many of what we call parts or chapters as you like. If you look at the rebus section, you'll see here's 5 pieces of front matter that they have. Here's their first part or section. Here are all the chapters which belong to that part. Here's the next part and the chapters that belong to that part, and so forth. In this book, we only have one part right now. It's called main body. So I might decide I want to make a new part or section for my book. So I could scroll down and click the add part button, or I could do it from the menu over here. I'm going to add a new part, and I'm going to call this section 2. It's not the most descriptive title, I know, but I've made a new part. And now, if I look down in my book, we'll see in my section 2, I can start to move content in there. So I want the parts chapter to come down here. I want Gregor and his sister to come down here. I want the LibreText thing to come down here. And I've just dragged and dropped. I could also move it up by clicking the move up button, or move down. And I can see that there's content available here. You'll also see from this menu a couple of categories or columns. One will show you the authors of this chapter. So right now, none of them have individual authors except for the bug, which was attributed to Leah, and chapters which came in from the Pressbooks guide. The other columns you'll see are show in web, show in exports, and show title. Show in web means, will this be visible if someone visits my book on the public web? If it's unclicked, this is private and it's only visible to logged in users, which means it's basically a draft in progress. I can toggle that for a chapter, or I can do it globally for a whole part by clicking on the title here. So you can see I just turn them all on or all off. I can do the same thing for exports. So this allows you to have a chapter that only appears in the webbook, but not in the PDF or ebook exports. or vice versa. So you have granular control. It's also nice in the case, let's say you made a very large open textbook and you're using it over the course of multiple semesters. You might want to make an export that's only semester 1. And so you'd select from this menu, okay, we're not using part 1 at all in this particular export, and then you generate a PDF. And then you change it and you'd make another export that would be semester 2, all from the same book. And so those are some of the tools you have here from the Organize menu for moving content around, creating parts and chapters, and making them visible on and off the web. The other real important thing is the global privacy status for the book. You remember when I created this book, I said it's private, I don't want it on the web. When I'm ready to flip that switch, I just click public, and now anyone who wants to can go to you can now view the webinar demo link on the open web. So I'm logged out, and you can see this is a public book, and all of these chapters here are visible, all the ones that I published. If I log back in, you'll also see there are a bunch of other chapters that only logged in users, or maybe that's not true because I've made them all public. But if I were to go back to Organize and make this chapter and this chapter private, now when I visit the book, you'll see a little button that says, oh, this is a private chapter, only logged in users will see it. And that's quick at a glance what happens there. Pause there for any questions about the Organize menu and how you'd kind of move content around.
So I am, Regina copied the book that I'm going to be revisiting and merging. And when I go to organize in that book, I don't seem to have permission to do anything. Do I need to do something to be able to edit things?
Let's talk about this then. So right now, there are 5 basic user roles in Pressbooks. So each one of you, when you're in a book, you'll have one of these 5 roles. Different roles have different permissions. So my suspicion is that you need to have the administrator role for your book. And maybe right now you have an author role, so I think Regina's looking into that and will probably give you the right role. But yeah, okay. So it's going to be related to your permissions.
Okay.
Yeah. And your permissions will be on a book by book basis. So on the same network, for example, so you might be an administrator in one book, and maybe you have a colleague in your department that says, Sal, I just want your help as an author in this other book. And you'd be an admin one place, an author in another, et cetera, et cetera. So I suspect it's just a permissions thing, and we'll get that sorted out soon.
Thank you.
Any other questions that people have about the Organize menu and what you can and can't do from it? Okay, the next thing I want to show you then is how you'd actually use Pressbooks to create and publish new content. So we imported a bunch of stuff, but let's say we want to make a new chapter. So I'm going to create a new chapter. The first thing I'll give this is a title, so demo chapter. And then I'll come into the editor, and you'll see right here at a glance that I have what we call what you see is what you get, or a visual WYSIWYG editor. This looks a lot like a word processor or a lot WordPress, which it's based on. So if you've used Word or WordPress before, this should look familiar. But there's a number of different things that you can do here. For example, you can create headings. So I'm a top level heading. I'm a paragraph. And then we'll make I'm a second level heading. And if I select that text and apply heading 2, I'm another paragraph. You can also do things like make text bold or italicized. You can add bulleted list, or you can change that list into a numbered list. You can add block quotes. You can add links. Also, I'll just make a little link here that points to I made a link that points to your library website. And then there are a couple of kind of Pressbook specific things that you can do. So there's a bunch of different formatting options. You might use these to do special indentation or hanging indents. So for example, if you have a bibliography chapter and you want them all to be formatted like a bibliography with hanging indents, you'd select all the text and apply the hanging indent to them. You might also be working in in Arabic or Hebrew or another language where the alphabet runs right to left. So you can select the text passage that you want and apply a right to left formatting so that it will display properly. Punctuation will appear at the left of a sentence rather than the right, etc. And you can do things like pull quotes, which are helpful for kind of more commercial or textbooky type things. Another really common use would be to add a series of text boxes. So for example, we have predefined a number of different text boxes that are often used in books or textbooks. A standard text box is just a standard text box. A shaded text box is a standard text box but shaded, and then you can go in and edit the content. And then there are 4 that are commonly used for textbook type things. So at the top of a chapter, you might say, I want to start with learning objectives. And so we make a pre-formatted text box here that says learning objectives that you could customize, and you can add learning objectives. At the end of a chapter, we might want to also add what we call key takeaways, and that would be a key takeaway text box. Inside the text, we might say, here's some exercises. And earlier on, we might also want to include something like examples. So there's 4 of these predefined text boxes that have a style and some appearance, and then you can customize what you'd like to have appear here as you see fit.
How would you customize the colors if you wanted to, or is it possible?
Let me pause at the demo and jump out to that. So that's great. So let's say we created this. I don't like the colors, for example. And so what I would do is I'd come into appearance and come to theme options. And here you'll see, here are the colors that are being used for each of those text boxes in the theme. And I could change them globally here. So let's say I don't want it to be green. I'd like it to be red as the background. And the background I want to be like a very faint red. So I'd use this little color picker. So now learning objectives should take on this new color. Let's make it a little, I don't know, deeper red. So globally in my book now, when I come back to this book, if I look back at that chapter, you'll now see that where am I at? Demo chapter. Learning objectives is now red everywhere in the book. And if I made a new learning objectives text box, it would be red everywhere in the book. So that'd be how you customize the colors there for one of those preset text boxes. Another thing that you can do from this menu, you can create simple tables. So these are just standard tables, and there'll be a bunch of tools here where you can say, if I look at table properties, you'll be able to apply a bunch of different classes. Like I might want this to be a full grid table, and you'd see all the full grid appears. And then I might want to set some cell properties or row properties or column properties, and you can do a lot of that just from this little table builder tool. You can also apply classes. If you really want to get into CSS styling, I'm not going to talk about that a ton here, but you can apply a class to any element in your book, which lets you target it for transforming its appearance later, and then using that tool. You can add anchors. So let's say I want to make an internal link here. Oops. So I'm going to say add an anchor, and I'm going to say heading 2 or something. I've just inserted an anchor, which I can then link to anywhere else in the book if you know how to use anchors. We describe that a bit more in our guide if you want to dig in more detail.
How do you add a link afterwards? Will it appear in the list of links?
Yeah, so in this case, what happens when you make an anchor is the link will be, I'll just show it as an example since you asked. Okay. So here is the actual URL for my chapter. So I'm going to take this URL, and to make it an anchor, what we do is we simply add a hashtag, and then we type the name of the anchor that I created. So in this case, it was heading 2. So this link can be loaded by anybody. If I open it in a new tab, what it will do is it will load the chapter and take me to the invisible anchor that I created earlier, which was called heading 2. So that's a way to do internal links if you really want to do deep internal linking. Creating anchors lets you jump specifically to a point on the page. In the next training, I'll also show you an even easier way to do this with hypothesis annotations, but that's one way to do it with the tools in the editor itself. Any other? Okay. What if you have content splitting your numbered list? How do you choose the next number to start with? There's a couple of different tricks to do that, Julie. They're usually done with CSS magic. I won't answer that here in this training because it would probably take me too long to explain, but that might be one to ask Regina, and then we can get back to you with a written answer after the webinar. Other questions that we wanted to answer so far? Okay, so that's, I got up to here in the menu so far, so I'm gonna delete this. Let's delete this table. Another thing that you may want to do is to say, let's make a footnote here. So at the end of this sentence, I want a footnote. To create a footnote in Pressbooks, you simply click the footnote button, you type, I'm a footnote, whatever you want your footnote to say, and we will insert that little short code for you. Your footnote content will be whatever comes in between that short code. So for example, I could turn this into a link inside of a footnote, or I could, sorry, excuse me. Oh, okay. Select that word and I'll make it a link. And I've just made a link inside of my footnote. I can make as many footnotes as I want and they'll all be automatically numbered. So new sentence, and I'll make another footnote, fake footnote. And these will automatically stay in numbered order because we're parsing those short codes as you want them to. The next thing that you might want to do is create a glossary term. So let's say the learning objectives, I want to tell people what a learning objective is, so when I click the glossary button, it will say, we didn't find an existing glossary term yet. You can create one. So the term is learning objectives, and I'll say something I want learners to know, do, or value at the end. That's not the best definition, but it's a starting one. You'll see we automatically created a short code here. And then I might say, I write the word learning objectives are great. And let's say I also want this to be linked to a glossary term. Because it's a term I've already created, when I click glossary term, it will say, oh, you already have an existing term called learning objectives. Do you want to link to that definition? Or do you want to create a new one? In this case, I'll say, yep, let's do the learning objectives one. And it will link to the same definition I've already made. Later on, I could make another, let's make another glossary term, text box, that's a simple word. A box with text in it. All right, so I've made two glossary definitions. At any point in this process, I can always preview my chapter and look at how it's going. So I can say, okay, here's how it's gonna look when I publish it. I've got my glossary term, got my other glossary term, got my footnote here, jumps down, got my second footnote here, they're numbered properly, and all my text boxes, they look kind of how I want them to look. So I'm gonna save this chapter. And I've got the first draft of my chapter kind of ready. You'll notice that once I save this chapter, oops, it'll create a new revision in my revision history, which will keep track of all the changes you made. So if you ever make a mistake and or you're working with an editor who did something wrong, you can always roll back and revert to a previous revision by clicking browsing the revision and then basically rolling back and saying, I want it to actually look the way it looked at this point in time. Restore that revision or restore this revision or whatever you'd like to do. Coming back to this thing, the next thing I want to show you then is we've inserted footnotes, we've inserted glossary terms. I also want to show you how you could start working very simply with media. So the first kind of media that we might want to include would be a YouTube video. So I went out and I found a nice little 90-second National Geographic video about Lake Michigan, right? And I like this video and I want it in my book. So what I need to do for YouTube or Vimeo is simply copy the URL, come back to Pressbooks, make a new line in the visual editor and paste, and we will use OEmbed to automatically make it an embedded video. It's pretty simple there. The next thing I might want to do is say, I want to get an image. So I went to the Creative Commons search and I searched for Lake Michigan. And of all these images, let's say I really like this one here. So this one here tells me who the creator was, what the license was. This is one I can use as a CC BY license. So let's go ahead and find it on Flickr. And I'm going to download this image in the medium size and put it in my book. So I've downloaded the image. I come back to Pressbooks, and here I'm going to put the image in. So I'll click Add Media. I'll upload the image that I just downloaded. I'll give it an alt text, boat on Lake Michigan. And I'll start entering the other metadata. So the title of this was actually Ship on Lake Michigan. That's probably more descriptive than boat. Okay. And then down below, we're also going to allow you to provide attributions for your media, which is pretty important when you're working with Creative Commons stuff. So first, the source URL, where did I find it? I found it on Flickr. Who's the author? Armand, okay. And I grabbed their URL from Flickr here. And what license did they choose? Well, if I click on this, it will tell me it was CC BY SA. So I'll say CC BY SA. I didn't make any adaptations, but if I did, I could add more of them. So I've just inserted my first image into the Pressbooks book. And you can upload your own images, use whatever media you'd like. You can do a similar thing with audio files or audio playlists. And you can also insert from a URL if you need to. So that's how we would insert media and insert video into my chapter. And I'm going to save and pause there. Okay. Questions so far?
We have a question just from Alexander.
Do the headings of text boxes make use of a heading tag? Right now, Alexander, if you want, you could, let's look at and we'll explore. What we're doing for most text boxes is we're creating a div, and inside of the div, we're not using a heading element. We're just using a regular paragraph text or a div element text. If you wanted to, you could turn it into a heading. So I could select this and I could say, let's make this a heading 2 element if I wanted to. But right now, no, we don't apply heading elements to text boxes. It's a pretty advanced question. Thanks.
So when you added the YouTube video,
Yeah.
maybe I missed it. You did not add metadata to it, or did you?
No, I didn't. So what's happening is we're just embedding the YouTube video. And so we can't add additional information. We're just putting an iframe in. So the attribution and other information will be included with the video itself. So if a user wanted to, they could, here, let me show you how it kind of works. So in the chapter, they can play the video in place, or you can see whatever YouTube includes. They can watch it on YouTube, or they can click here and it will take them to the video on YouTube where whatever metadata that's been provided would be available for the user. But that's typically how the embedding will work for external elements. We can't, there's not an easy way for us to grab and display it using the OEmbed standard, but we always will refer back, so we point back. In this case, we haven't made a copy of the video, we've just embedded it, so it's a clear, fair use, and you're not violating copyright in any way by embedding a video into your book. The last thing that I want to show then in the training is, let's pretend like our book is finished and we're ready to do something interesting with it. I hinted at this earlier, but in the appearance, you can now select a theme. You can choose how you want your book to look. That first book that we were looking at from Rebus would use the Andreessen theme, and you can recognize it by that little title that was blue and italic. Our book is using the McLuhan theme, but there's 20 other themes that you could use. They all look different, and you get a sense for the preview. In this case, let's say I like Malala a lot. I'm going to activate the Malala theme, and it will change the appearance of my book. So if I go and look at the chapter that I was looking at before, you'll now notice, wow, a lot of things are different in this chapter. The content's all the same, but the display has changed quite a lot because I applied a new theme. If I like that theme, I can then go into theme options and customize even more things. There's lots of other choices. For example, I could turn on this 2-level table of contents. I can display my attributions. I could add support for other languages which use different character sets than English or than the Latin alphabet. I can choose to display chapter licenses in my exports at the end of the chapter. And then I can customize the text boxes like you saw me doing earlier. Let's save all of these changes. You'll also notice a bunch of different theme options that are available for the web book only So in this particular book, I can change the typefaces if I use this theme, which is fun. I can make the book a little bit wider. I can choose to indent paragraphs instead of skipping lines. And I can do lots of other kind of fun things. They're options. Let's say I made the web book look just like I want it to, right? I've got a wide web book. It's all looking great. I've got in my table of contents now, you'll notice all of my top level headings are appearing. The H1s are now in the table of contents, which is fun. And they're automatically anchor links. But now let's say I want to get ready for my PDF export. Here's where you can really customize and control how your print book will look without having to know code and without having to know InDesign. So you can make a lot of different choices. The page size, the line height, the font size, margin sizes, what you do with hyphens and paragraphs and section openings and table of contents and footnotes and widows and orphans, which is a print term for how many lines appear before a page breaks. And then you can even customize the running headers and footers in your book with a bunch of different choices. So let's say I've got the PDF all ready to go, and now I'm ready to export. Here's the Pressbooks export page. It's pretty simple. We're gonna make a PDF and an EPUB export for this book. And I'm gonna click this button. It'll run through the process and hopefully it'll make exports. I'm guessing it will have a couple of errors because I didn't clean up my HTML yet, but the process should complete in a few seconds to a minute. It's a pretty big book because I imported that whole Aluda Equiano stuff. But as it runs through this process, the files will then become available for me as an book admin here. So I'll say, okay, I've got a print PDF and I have an EPUB. I can download these files and share them however I want. Let's take a look at the print PDF. Here's a print ready version. It's almost 400 pages and it uses the Malala theme. It looks pretty good. Here's my table of contents. I haven't done any customization, but this looks like an okay book. Jump down to my section. If you look at the, for an example, where was my chapter? Near the bottom. I don't remember where my chapter was. I probably didn't include it in the PDF, but you can see that, for example, there was a YouTube video. We can't obviously put a video in a PDF, but we'll tell them there was a YouTube element and we'll give them a link to where they could view it online. And then the last thing that you may want to do is decide, I want these export files to be available to everyone. So you'd come to sharing and privacy and you'd say, yes, make the export files available from the home page for free to everyone. So now when I visit the book, you can download the EPUB and the PDF freely from the web for this sample book that I created. I know I've gone a little bit long, so let me pause there and say last questions or anything else people want to ask. But that's kind of the beginning training.
Yeah, especially for our OER faculty awardees, what might in Steele's training prompted you to like think about some of the options that you can do or you would want to do in your projects? And that's Ayman and Saddam.
Okay, so I'll show a little bit about language support and what that might look like in Pressbooks. So the first and most basic thing that you'll want to do is, if you're working and the book is written in a non-English language, you'll probably want to come into book info and indicate what language it's in. In my case, I'm gonna pick French because that's the only non-English language that I can speak, so I'll still be able to orient myself. So I'm gonna say French for this book. So I've saved that and you'll notice that in the book itself, a lot of different things have now changed. So a bunch of the text that's displaying for me is now displaying en français, right, in French. If I were to visit this book, you'll see the book is now displaying the word table of contents in French, and it gives people reading instructions in French. And the metadata will now be in French. And we'll support this as much as possible where we have languages, where we have the translations provided. Now the translation for the Pressbooks into all these languages is largely done by volunteers in the open source community, so it may not be complete. So in some cases, French is pretty complete because we've worked on that as a French-Canadian company. But some other languages, you'll notice some of the terms will be translated and others won't because our translation's incomplete. But the next thing for actually working in the book, if we come to the, let me actually change, well, I don't know, you can see it in French, that's fine. If I were to come to the appearance section and theme options, you'll see here a language selection creator. And you can pick, for example, if I wanted to support Arabic in my book, and if I also wanted to support Hindi or Devanagari, I could select those languages. And what Pressbooks will do is now it will make sure that those character sets and those alphabets are available for use in the book. So those authors are probably used to switching their keyboard layout to write in that language. Once they start typing, the language, those characters will appear in the book and will also be included in the web book and all of the exports. So this is how you would declare like alphabet support for languages which use non-Latin alphabets. So you can see there's several different languages available here. We've got Chinese, Devanagari, Hebrew, Arabic, etc., Japanese, Korean, and so forth. So that's generally what you do for declaring support for the language. And then there are a number of other kind of additional customizations or options that you can do while working in a foreign language. I showed one of them earlier with the right to left visual editor switch. And then when it comes time to change the user interface, there are a few more options that are detailed in the guide, and I can link you to that.
So just for clarification, if you're teaching Arabic to students that speak English natively, you would want the book setting to be English, and then you would add support for the Arabic alphabet because you will have sections in Arabic.
That's the most probable course of action, yes. Now, though I can see a case where you're saying actually the goal is target language proficiency. So right. I want the book settings to be in Arabic as well, for example. Right. But it's really the instructor's choice there.
Yeah, and it really is the instructor who will have to make that decision because, you know,
it will depend on the proficiency of the students, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's true.
And some of them may not be like for second language speakers. So
right.
Let me try to find this book. We made when I was at the University of Wisconsin, there's a lot of less commonly taught languages there. And we were supporting a bunch of people in the Asian languages and African languages department who were writing foreign language acquisition books in their target language because there was no commercial textbook available. I sent Regina a bunch of links to those in the past, and I can't dig them up right now, but we could find them and share them if needed with people as.
And Rajiv, who is doing the basic Hindi, is part of that project, as I mentioned, still, because he worked with the grantees also from the University of Wisconsin. So yeah, and they're really big on the LICTL, which is the least commonly taught language.
Sure. I also saw a great question in the chat from Julie to ask about accessibility support. So let me tell you a couple of things about accessibility. So first, for the platform itself, we have produced what's called a VPAT. Some people may be familiar with the VPAT, others may not. A VPAT is the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. And so what we did was we worked with a couple of people, but most closely, there's a group called the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University in Toronto. We worked very closely with them for a couple of years, and then we hired them to help us do a full accessibility audit of the platform and help us produce our VPAT. So this VPAT describes our conformance with the WCAG 2.0A and AA guidelines, and we are conformant at all levels at 2.0A and AA for the platform itself, with a couple of small kind of partially supports exceptions noted in the VPAT. So I'll share that VPAT. There are also a couple of things that we do for accessibility for users. So one would be, if you, as a user, you can come into your profile at any time, and you can switch your color scheme, for example. Like we have this red, and there's pretty high contrast here, but we also made a Pressbooks accessibility user scheme that's an even higher level of contrast, and one where every one of the links is underlined in the admin interface for additional disambiguation. So if user is saying, hey, it's very difficult for me to rely on color alone to distinguish a link, then this is an accessibility profile that's better for them as a user. So that's one of the kind of accessibility functions that's available for users. Another thing that can happen is you'll notice that every user, there's also what we call a sitemap. And this sitemap provides an alternate form of navigation. Now this is all keyboard navigable. So for example, I can navigate through this and open and close with just the keyboard. And that's all good. But you may also want a simpler form of navigation. So this will show me all of the links that are available to me in this dashboard, just in a simple navigable list format. So there's your alternate sitemap. A couple of other accessibility things that we'd recommend would be, there are a couple of very good guides to making content accessible in Pressbooks, published with Pressbooks. So BC Campus has made a very good one, and the Chang School at Ryerson University. I can provide some links to Regina there. And those are just guidelines for creators, making sure they include alt text, making sure their headings are in sequential order, etc. But on our side, at the platform side, we try to do whatever we can to make sure the platform is accessible and that content is as accessible as possible by default. Another example would be when we produce the PDF exports, we're using the PDF, I can't remember, UA profile, which is the accessible PDF profile. So hopefully the PDF will have proper headings and will be as accessible as possible by default if users have followed basic guidelines. And we have an accessibility statement if you want to see our accessibility statement. And we also are very interested to know, like if we're doing something wrong, or if we have areas to improve, we're always interested to hear about those issues. Recently, the University of Washington did an additional audit for us, and they noticed a dozen or so issues, and we've worked through them, and we have 1 or 2 left. But that was very helpful for us to catch accessibility issues that we didn't know about or that we had missed in our original audit. So thanks. Yeah, we do want our product to be, it is inclusive to as many users as possible. So thanks for that question, Julie.
Yeah, so any other question? We have a few minutes left.
I did have a question concerning, or way in the beginning, we were talking about collecting responses from questions that you put in the books themselves. I heard you say that MSU wasn't supporting that. Is that correct? Or is there a reason that we're not doing that?
So like what Steele mentioned, so this is like the interactive exercises that the author might put into their open textbooks, because there's no integration between D2L where the grade book is and
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so we really
so it's a lack of D2L integration then.
Yes, because it's a decision by ITS, because this is a third-party system, and my understanding is that they, still.
Let me stop recording.